Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are watching the MKUltra show. I, of course, am your host, Carter M. Nelson, and I have a massive show for you guys tonight. I apologize for being so late to the stream on this evening, but I can promise you it was only because I was working so hard to ensure that this story would be well put together. And the major news that we have for today is is the Iran war. As you all know, because you've obviously been watching the show, the ceasefire is over, and this is something that I talked about immensely last week, but it's official. The ceasefire is completely done. But like I said, I've already talked about it immensely. I told you that the ceasefire was going to end. I told you why that would happen, and I told you the future implications of that. So instead of focusing on that directly, because I've already talked about it so to such great lengths, what I am instead going to be focusing on today is how the ceasefire coming to an end and the Iran war starting back up is going to affect the future of the Republican Party. And more specifically, who are the key players who will have a major influence in this change. So, without a further of ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into it. But before I do that, I would like to ask you guys, please like, subscribe, share this video. It greatly helps to get the message out. And this one's going to be a big one. Like I said, big show, big show. Very excited. Now, when I tell you that this war is going to have incredibly high impacts on the future of the Republican Party, I mean it. And why is that? Well, who is the guy who's currently being put into the position to be the front runner for the 2028, excuse me, presidential candidacy? Well, that would be Mr. J.D. Vance. Now, what is the problem with the war? Well, the war already to start was incredibly unfavorable, especially among the former Trump supporters, many of which who are now disillusioned and have moved away. And and why is that? Well, the major reason for that is Trump's campaign promises. It was no new wars, it was America first. And what is this war? Absolutely not. Well, it's a new war, and it is not in any way America first. So it's a direct antithesis to what Trump originally promised he would represent. So JD Vance, being the natural next guy up, the guy that was supposed to replace Donald Trump, the guy who was supposed to take the crown of the MAGA kingdom, through Trump breaking all of these campaign promises, it also starts to break apart the kingdom which he has built, this political empire that he has held together since 2016, where if you're not a Trump guy, you really aren't winning Republican elections anymore. But because of the implications of this war and his major incompetencies to fulfill the campaign promises, I mean, what happened to the wall, Donald? What happened to the wall? Why isn't Hillary in jail? But the various number of campaign promises he's broken has disillusioned a great majority of his base, meaning that that throne, the guy fulfilling the MAGA kingdom, it's not looking as sexy as it did 4 years ago, as it did 6 years ago, even as it did 8 years ago when Trump went on his monumental generational run and cook that election, an election which everybody said he could not win. A primary he was not supposed to win, an election against Hillary Clinton he was not supposed to win. So when he won that, all the momentum was on his side, but due to his various incompetencies, due to the people that he placed around himself, along with his own failures, it just seemed that, well, this wasn't our guy. This wasn't the guy he promised to be. And Vance is quite literally a direct representation of the change of Trump over the years. Vance, of course, was formerly an anti Trumper, as many of you know, very hard-lined anti Trump. And then this guy seems to come out of nowhere onto the political scene. He's a rookie in political office, and he ends up getting picked to be Trump's VP. And now, why is that important? Why does he end up being the guy who's picked for a VP spot, which absolutely represented who is supposed to lead the Republican Party in the post-Trump era? Well, that that is where we get into the major point of this video. The people controlling the Republican Party today. And who is that? It's a group commonly referred to as the PayPal Mafia, but who we're going to specifically get into tonight is the Palantir sect, the Palantir Mafia of the PayPal Mafia. So they're the ones that got Trump to pick JD. They're the ones who want him so desperately to be the guy in 2028. He's currently looking like the guy that they're going to throw all their support behind. But, like I was saying earlier, this matter gets a lot more complicated by this ceasefire falling apart. Because what was J.D. Vance supposed to represent in this? Well, in 2028, when those elections come around, more specifically in 2027, when debates start, when the primaries begin, when we start to actually look into it, well, J.D. Vance, the plan, in my opinion, was that J.D. Vance was going to say, well, I stood by the president as that was my job as the vice, but I was major in creating peace. But if this war goes on and peace doesn't happen and the economic strain of it continues to be felt among American citizens and the overall disapproval of the war continues to increase, well, JD Vance is left in a position where he can no longer say he's the guy who got peace. He's the guy who actually ended the war despite sticking by Trump when the war began. No, instead, JD Vance is an extension of the war because he was unable to secure peace for the nation. He was unable to secure peace for its time. So that puts Vance in an incredibly dangerous position. But still, it is very likely that this Palantir group will continue supporting Vance and will invest support into him through 2028. Now, because of the current direction of things, there's also the opportunity that Marco Rubio will be the guy, and that's actually something we're already seeing. Polling numbers for Rubio are increasing. His odds to win the presidential nomination on the Republican side are increasing, and that's because he won't have to deal with the same issues as Vance of I couldn't secure peace. Instead, what Rubio can focus on is that he was able to essentially effectively govern over a number of states which the US has directly intervened in over the Trump's presidency. So what he'll be able to say is I was able to effectively govern over foreign nations on behalf of US interests and put it on Vance to prove that he was not actually the issue in the Iran war, which will be incredibly difficult. So I'm going to break down exactly why they currently support Vance, how they got him into the position that he's in today, and why it's also possible for if Vance fails to put up the numbers expected, why it is completely reasonable for them to switch over into the supporting of a Marco Rubio type. All right, let's jump right into it. So, the head of Palantir, the face of it essentially. When you say Palantir, the name everybody thinks of is Peter Thiel. He is the direct owner of it. Peter Thiel was one of the original founders of the company. And right away, let's get into why does Peter Thiel have a connection with Donald Trump? Well, if you remember, back in 2016, it was the PayPal Mafia that was a major influence in getting Trump elected. It's like this group of tech guys who want to see changes in the way the tech industry is ran. They see a guy who is not technically part of the establishment, so they use him to create their establishment. And in 2016, Peter Thiel donates $2.75 million to the Donald Trump campaign. That's not an exact number, but that's a rough estimate. It was around $2.7 million through both direct individual donations along with donations to PACs, which then donated money to Trump. So Peter Thiel was a major investor in the original campaign. He got into the entire MAGA atmosphere by being one of the original guys with a great deal of wealth who directly backed Donald Trump. He was able to really become a major part of the movement. Now, Peter Thiel would again donate to Trump in 2020, but it would be significantly scaled back to the total of $250,000. Trump isn't everything that the PayPal mafia was interested in, especially after his first presidency. So they calmed down a little bit, and instead, what Peter Thiel did was start focusing on more on other candidates such as Mr. J.D. Vance. And now here's the connection that Vance and Thiel had leading up to 2022, when Peter Thiel would directly make a major contribution to Vance's campaign. Well, in 2011, Vance would attend one of Thiel's lectures during his time at Yale, and that would be the way the two would meet. And then a little bit later, while working at Circuit Therapeutics, Vance would impress Thiel's team while pitching the company for investment. Later on, 2016, Thiel would go ahead and hire Vance as a principal at Mithril Capital. Thiel would then help finance Vance's venture capital firm, Narya Capital. And finally, like I said, that 2021 2022 time, when around that period post 2020, where Thiel would stop primarily investing in the presidency of Donald Trump and instead more so the different members that were trying to get into office around him, Thiel would become the biggest backer of Vance's Senate campaign, in which he would make a contribution of approximately $15 million through a super PAC, which made it incredibly clear to everybody that, well, Vance is the guy. Now, something interesting about Peter Thiel is around 2023, Peter Thiel would actually take a step back from politics. And why would he do this? Well, Peter Thiel, for those of you who don't know, is a gay guy, right? So, give me one moment, everybody. Just give me one moment. I'll be right back with you. Excuse me for that. Just a really quick little interruption on that one, but no big deal. No big deal. Um we're gonna jump right back to where I was. So, Peter Thiel is a gay man, openly gay, and he married his husband, Matt Danielson, in October of 2017. Now, Peter Thiel also had his side piece. His side piece was a man named Jeff Thomas, and they were in a relationship during the period of time where Thiel was married to his husband. Now, in the end of 2022, Thiel and his husband would host a New Year's Eve party. One of the people that would attend this party would be Jeff Thomas. And several anonymous sources have claimed that Thomas was not actually on the guest list, and that Danielson actually got incredibly upset seeing him. And what the report is saying is Danielson would get quite upset and begin asking, "Why is he here?" And it, his incredibly gay voice, I'm sure that he has. "Why is he here? Peter, Peter, why did you bring your side piece? This is so embarrassing." And then Thomas would then go ahead and be escorted out by security. And what friends have anonymously reported is saying that this situation was incredibly embarrassing and humiliating for Thomas, along with rumors that it was humiliating for Teal and Matt as well. To a great deal. To a great deal. So, this whole situation happens. They have their little gay fight. And just about 2 months later, on March 8th of 2023, Jeff Thomas would be found dead at the bottom of an apartment. Now, the official ruling of this was that not Matt, that Jeff killed himself. He jumped off the building due to his extreme mental health issues, which might have, by some speculation, been increased by the incident that happened at the party a few months earlier. Now, very little of this investigation is public at all. We know very little what resulted in the conclusion that homicide would be ruled out and that it was a suicide. And for that reason, various rumors have started about could this potentially have maybe not necessarily allegedly been a clear and cut suicide. Well, there's these allegations and rumors that Teal may have had a part in this, and that's not something that I'm personally going to get into because I don't have any personal or credible evidence pointing towards that outside of what is circumstantial. But I do think it's something interesting worth noting, and the reason that I brought this up in correlation towards Teal's various political donations is after this time, Teal would actually take a step back from politics, and he would state that the death of his boyfriend would have or did have a major effect on his mental health, which resulted in him having the desire to just take a step back. So that's essentially what we had happening with that. Now, moving on from Peter Thiel, I would like to take a second to talk about Alex Karp, CEO of Palantir and also a founder alongside Peter Thiel. Now, the interesting thing about Alex Karp is he's the only member of this group who is currently to this day openly a supporter of Democrats. He is a liberal leaning guy. In fact, he has openly described himself at times as a socialist, although he has taken his fair share of different political titles over his tenure. Now, give you a little bit of background on him. Alex Karp donated an estimate number of $360,000 to the Biden campaign in 2024 before Biden would end up dropping out and Kamala Harris would take the mantle of the Democrats' front runner against the Don. But he would also donate $10,000, both estimates, in 2020 to the Biden campaign. So what does this create here? Well, the face of Palantir is Peter Thiel. That's the name that everybody thinks of. But the guy who actually does a lot of the media and the guy who does a lot of the active inner workings of the company is this Alex Karp. So on one end, you have a guy who's consistently supporting what were previously non-establishment conservatives and have become the new establishment GOP. So you have a guy who's very in favor of a lot of the swamp that we currently have swimming around in the GOP of 2026. Now, on the other end, you have a guy who is a pretty firm supporter of a lot of the more classical Democrats. So we have two guys in this company who are actually able to put their investments in opposite sides of the spectrum and maintain good relationships through both sides. So no matter who takes office, somebody that's at the head of Palantir is going to have a decent relationship at worst with whatever party is currently running the system. Now, Alex Karp, something interesting about him, about his liberal policies, is he's extremely pro-Israeli, which is something that's becoming more and more rare on the Democrats' side of things. And he also is somebody that does believe in border security, border control. So, yeah, he's certainly a guy who really goes either way with things. He's not as firm of a Democrat as I'd say as a lot of the other guys on this list are firm Republicans. He is very much so a mainstream type of Democrat guy. You know, he likes the ones that are legitimately backed by the establishment. He's an establishment Democrat. Now, with Alex Karp covered, the next name that I would like to share with you is Jacob Hellberg. Now, Jacob Hellberg, interestingly enough, donated $1 million to Biden in 2020. Now, it is important to note during this time, Hellberg did not yet have a role in Palantir. So, to give you a little bit of background on him, he worked for Google during this 2020 time. However, due to his belief that cybersecurity was becoming a major national security issue, he would end up leaving this role to pursue more government connected positions. And this would result in September of 2022 when congressional leaders would appoint him to the U.S. China Economic and Security Review Commission. So that would be his first major role in the United States government. Now, I do also believe that it's important to note that despite donating $1 million to Biden in 2020, the lockdown protocols would essentially push him away from the Democratic Party. He went to a more libertarian view on that sort of thing. After that, it was something that de-radicalized him, I guess you could say. It pushed him away from the left wing. So around 2021, we start to see a shift in his political views to a more favorable Republican position. And when he was appointed, he was technically appointed by a Democratic House. However, it was only done because the Republican House that was taking over was about to appoint him themselves, so the Democrats went ahead and just did it. Now, after serving his time at this position, again, he was the U.S. China Economic and Security Review Commission. He would end up getting a job at Palantir in the year of 2023. And what he would do for Palantir is he would work as an advisor for Alex Karp. And this is a position that he would hold for 2 years up until 2025. So his major role was he would advise Karp in terms of dealing with the government essentially. That's what would get him his job was his government connections he made while working in the federal government. So that gave him more insight on the inner workings of the political system, which made him a better advisor for Palantir to continue growing in their pretty major contracts they currently have with the US federal government. So they would bring this government guy, in as an advisor. Now, or before I get ahead of myself, in 2024, he would end up donating $1 million to Donald Trump. So really the complete reversal of what he did in 2020. So that really shows his political progression, regression, whatever you want to call it, his political movement over that 4 year period. Now, after working for Palantir as an advisor. Jacob Helberg is currently serving as the U.S. Uh, serves under the Secretary of State for Economic Affairs, and he is directly working under Marco Rubio. So, Jacob Helberg is who does still do advising work for Palantir. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And he is also currently working in the government under Marco Rubio. So he's currently in the position where he has incredibly good relationships with Palantir and Alex Karp specifically. And he is building pretty significant relationships in the political world. So what he really represents is where the two worlds are colliding in a way. Um, from a standpoint that is deeper than just donations. He's kind of like their inside guy, I guess you could call it. Now, the final man I would like to touch up on is Joe Lonsdale. Now, Joe was also a founder of Palantir. However, he is somebody that left during the earlier stages of the company. He is no longer working there. But the reason that I still felt it was important to include him is he is currently the chairman of the board of the Cicero Institute. And for those of you who don't know what the Cicero Institute is, it is a think tank, essentially. It's a state think tank. It is across a majority of you, maybe not the majority, but a significant portion of US states. And what they essentially are doing is they get together, they come up with legislation that they would like to see passed. They provide why it should be passed through their different analyses, which they will provide. And something that they do that makes them an incredibly powerful think tank is they actually write up the entire legislation. They write up any flaws, they write up all the pros, and it makes it so they are incredibly successful in getting the bills that they want passed. So, the Cicero Institute has become incredibly major in the movement of bills throughout our political offices. And something that they are a major supporter of is liberties with AI. So this includes the funding of different AI institutes, along with a deregulations of AI. So this is something that directly promotes Palantir's interests, even though it's not specific to Palantir in any way. What they are doing is still giving benefits to a corporation like Palantir due to their extensive uses of AI modeling. So, why did I just give you all of those names? Why are they so crucial? Well, for one, let's see, where do the strings collide? Where do all of these men, despite having various different political beliefs and various different ways that they contribute politically, where do their views truly intersect outside of just working or formally working for Palantir? Well, these are all incredibly pro-Israel. All of them. Every last one of them. They have all been major advocates for U.S. support in Israel. Palantir is a major part of the IDF's defense agency. I guess those are the same thing. That doesn't make sense what I just said, but you understand what I'm saying. They are a major part of Israeli defense, is essentially the point. So what they are is Palantir currently is one of the front runners of AI and use in the United States on a federal governmental level, and they are the same for Israel. So these guys are all major supporters of US and Israeli connections and have consistently pushed for greater relations, for sharing between intelligence, because they are serving under the interests of both nations. So that's something that's incredibly important to recognize when you're talking about anybody in the Palantir Mafia. They all love Israel, and I'm sure you can guess why they all do. It's not that hard to put together. I'm not sure if I can say it on YouTube, but just look up all of their names and then go to the early life section. That's typically what I would recommend for a situation like this one. But now, where do the all of these guys connect with the Republican Party and the future of it? Like I said, they are going to have a continued major impact. Well, like I was talking about earlier, Peter Thiel was one of the major original backers of the Trump campaign, which gave him a starting influence in the direction of the Republican Party as Trump became the most influential man the Republicans have seen in a very, very long time, maybe since Reagan, honestly. And the way that he has shaped the way the party looks today, maybe the most influential since Reagan. So Peter Thiel getting in on that early ended up being a pretty good investment, I must say. Despite my grievances, it was one hell of an investment. But the more important thing is what they are trying to do with the future of the Republican Party. And they have been backing a number of candidates since Trump. We have Masters out of Arizona, who's not currently in office, but will likely run again potentially in 2028 to try to get a seat in Arizona. And he is somebody who was extremely, extremely backed by this Palantir Mafia. They loved the guy. Oh, did they love the guy? And then obviously the most major guy they have is JD Vance, a guy who they all pushed heavily for Donald Trump to appoint as a VP, which if you would have said in 2016 would have sounded crazy because JD Vance was a never Trumper, a firm never Trumper throughout Trump's presidency. However, due to the extreme pressure of the Palantir Mafia, JD Vance would end up getting a spot um, as Trump's VP. And it wasn't just the Palantir Mafia, it really did extend to the PayPal Mafia. Like I said, the Palantir Mafia is like an extension of the PayPal group. So the PayPal group also includes like Elon Musk, who is also a major, major supporter of JD Vance becoming the vice president. And Elon Musk being a major funder that is bound to have significant influences on what Trump's decisions ended up being. So what they're trying to position and have been trying to position JD Vance for is to be the guy who takes over for Trump. That's the goal. And why do they have that interest? Well, like I said earlier, Vance and Teal are friends. Teal is often described as a mentor figure to JD. And if you need any more evidence that JD is an incredibly untrustworthy guy, I mean, there's so much weird with him. I mean, he's married to Usha. His kid's name is Vivek, which is something we're going to get into a little bit more later. He has changed his name multiple times over the years. Look it up if you don't believe me. JD Vance has changed his name multiple times. He positioned himself as a veteran when really he was just a journalist in the military, which I mean is still something, but it's not the same as somebody who is out putting his life on the line. And yeah, I mean he's been very shady, and his connection with Peter Thiel should pretty much tell you all you need to know. But again, so they have a great amount of interest in him because of his strong ties with Peter Thiel, because JD Vance also represents a great deal of what the Palantir Group is interested in. And what is it? It's a strong opposition to the Russo-China axis, or however you want the Sino Russian axis, however you want to say it. But a major part of what all of these guys are interested in is building a tech company which can directly compete on a militaristic and intelligence level in the US government with the intelligence that is being built in Russia and China. So it's a major opposition to those countries, which JD Vance is firmly on board for. It's a firm support of Israel. That's one of their biggest priorities, firm support of Israel, something that JD is for. It is incredibly anti-Iran. Why is it anti-Iran? Well, Iran is viewed by all of these guys as a nation who is a direct ally of who they view as our biggest national threats, who are Russia and China. So these are all issues that they all agree with JD on. JD is also an advocate for border security, but not to like any kind of crazy extent, not to any extent that is further than what we are seeing under the Trump administration, which is honestly pitiful. But that's kind of where all of these guys stand too, which is better border security than under Biden, but also they're not all that interested in mass deportations, right? And most importantly, likely most importantly, is JD Vance is pro AI. JD Vance will fund further developments of AI. He will put government contractor money into Palantir almost without a doubt. So these are all interests that Vance shares with this group, which makes Vance clearly the best guy for the throne in their eyes. Right. So their goal this whole time has been to get JD in 2028. And that's not their only political goal. Another major interest that I fully believe they have is because of Vivek's consistent views and shared views with this group and his connections with Vance. It's likely that they would like to see a guy like him win in Ohio and eventually be the guy to take the crown after Vance is done. And then you also have Masters out of Arizona, who, again, major shared interests on all of the points that I've talked about so far. All of these guys, they all share these same interests. They all believe in an expansion of AI. They all believe in really tapping into the international markets, the international employees, bringing them over, on H-1B and such, creating more workers for these different groups. It's incredibly clear what they want to do. They want the expansion of Palantir throughout all of United States governmental systems. So they're pushing the guys that can get that. Now, why does the Iran war have any influence on everything that I've been talking about? Because I promised you that it did. Well, like I was talking about previously in the show, the Iran war is incredibly unfavorable among the American people. None of them want this war, and none of them want the economic impacts that we are all currently feeling because of the war. And as it drags on more, the economic impacts will only grow. And I've talked about this on every show, but oil reserves continuing to drain. We are not exporting oil through the Strait of Hormuz, which is where 20% of the world's supply comes from. The price of oil is increasing because of a lesser supply, obviously increasing demand. And with the increase of price of oil, it increases the price of energy. Energy becomes more scarce, harder to get your hands on, increases the price of it. The increased price of energy increases the price of the creation of consumer goods. You can see where I'm getting at. The economic impacts are being felt not just at gas stations, but in every single field of consumerism. So the longer this war goes on, the the more the greater our struggles with oil become as the war continues to rage. Well, the less popular the Republican Party is, and the Democrats actually, the best thing to happen to them was losing in 2024 because now they get to be in the opposition, and one of the times where the major party is has been put itself into what is one of the most unpopular, excuse me, sorry, I got distracted there. One of the most unpopular political terms we have ever seen. So, yeah. The Democrats are in a favorable position, honestly, by losing in 2024, which means Vance's job gets a lot harder. And like I was talking about earlier, he is going to have to somehow position himself as somebody who is fighting for peace. But if he fails to get this peace, then, well, it's going to be hard for him to recover. And that's why I wanted to talk about Marco Rubio, and more specifically, why I wanted to talk about Jacob Hellberg's connection with Marco Rubio by currently working under him, along with Hellberg's connection with Palantir, right? So let's say hypothetically, obviously Vance is their guy. When it comes down to it, Vance is the guy that they want. Without a doubt. Without a shadow of a doubt, Vance is the guy they want. But if he's incredibly unfavorable and he's not going to win, well, I think Marco Rubio's the next guy up, without a doubt. I think Marco Rubio, who also shares the same interests on challenging our domestic threats in China, Russia, and Iran, he becomes the clear next choice. He also is in favor of the expansion of AI in our defense industries. So that's the major point here. The major connections Palantir has shaped the Republican Party. It managed to de-radicalize the Trump movement. It brought in a guy like J.D. Vance to take over the Trump movement. Well, essentially what they did was they advocated for MAGA candidates who didn't support the original message. Those guys got into office. Most importantly and most evidently, J.D. Vance himself. They pushed Trump to move away from the people who actually stood with the original message, move away from the people who actually seem to have some semblance of a care for America First, Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene. You know, those people, they're gone. They're gone. And the movement has been de-radicalized. And who did Palantir pick to step up and take the throne? Well, it's J.D. Vance, a guy with a foreigner for a wife, a guy with Indian children, a guy with a child named Vivek, named after Vivek Ramaswamy, which why I was talking about earlier. Vivek Ramaswamy is somebody that they're going to be trying to mold into taking over after Vance, because the Palantir Group has their connection with Vance, and through Vance, they have a connection with Ramaswamy. So, Ramaswamy is a clear guy to step up. Same with Masters. That's also what they're trying to do with him in Arizona. Craft him into somebody who can step up. But they have managed to shape the Republican Party by pretty much choosing who will be the successors, who will take over for MAGA after Donald Trump's gone, and direct Donald Trump and where he's taking MAGA by getting into politics, funding people who work with Trump through through their incredibly vast relationships and political networking. They were able to completely shape the movement and move it from America first and into AI, Israel first, anti-Russia, anti-China, as opposed to putting America first. And why did they do this originally? Well, I think it's because Thiel saw how electrifying Trump's original movement was and wanted to take it for himself, which is something that, quite honestly, he did. So, essentially, what I'm presenting here is Palantir corrupted the MAGA movement, took it over. They influenced a number of major key players in the movement. They are trying to direct it through J.D. Vance, and the consequence of the Iran war is J.D. Vance may not now be popular enough to win in 2028, And so they have their connection with Marco Rubio in case that's the guy that they need. They have it all planned out. And after him, their goal is going to be Vivek. I'm pretty confident in that. After Rubio, their guy will be Vivek. So don't vote for Vivek in Ohio. We need him to lose. If you are listening from Ohio, please, 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 please vote for the Democrat. I know she is a Jew. I know she will be terrible for the state. But I promise you, the consequences of Vivek winning will be much more consequential, not only on the state of Ohio, but also on the entire nation itself, than having to live under a Democratic governor for 4 years. Trust me, you'll be okay. Please, please vote against Vivek. We cannot have that man win because he wins, and well, the Palantir push continues. And they've really influenced everywhere. I mean, I talked about the think tank and so the Cicero Institute, a major think tank. I've talked about their political connections on both the Republican and Democratic sides. I've talked about their connections in the Israel government, their connections in the United States government. They have connections with various different major tech industries. They have connections with OpenAI. They have deals done with NVIDIA. They are everywhere, and their reach is expanding. And the only way we stop it is by not voting in for the establishment Republican candidates that they created for us by stealing our America First presidency. So, yeah, that's the direction we're heading in. I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping up the show here. If you guys have any questions, go ahead, ask now, ask later in the comments. I'll go ahead. I'll be back. I'll look through them. I'll respond to anything you leave. But if you made it this far, please like, subscribe. I think this video is incredibly crucial, and I do believe it needs to be shared. So, please get the word out about what Palantir is doing to our nation. But thank you so much for watching so long. Peace out, and God bless y'all.